It was February 1946, inside Manhattan's legendary Stork Club. The moment Lucky Luciano stepped into the VIP section, the entire room scrambled to their feet. Well, everyone but a single man. Bumpy Johnson didn't flinch. He just sat there, puffing on his cigar, staring down the guy who had just brought every Italian crime family under one roof. Luciano's muscle twitched toward their holsters, but the boss waved them off. He knew the black man opposite him held the keys to the one thing bullets couldn't buy: the massive cash flow of the Harlem numbers game. The next 60 seconds would decide the fate of the city. Bumpy's words were about to spark a historic partnership or unleash a bloodbath that would turn New York inside out. While the rest of America was popping champagne to celebrate the end of World War II in February 1946, the back alleys of New York were gearing up for a brand new fight. Lucky Luciano, the architect of modern organized crime, was fresh out of Dannemora after doing a 9-year stretch. Uncle Sam had cut him a break. The trade was simple: secure the waterfront for the war effort and get out of jail free. Lucky held up his end, but the government threw in a kicker: he was getting deported. The feds gave him less than 3 weeks before putting him on a boat to Italy forever. But a man like Lucky wasn't about to vanish without locking down his kingdom first. The 5 families were falling in line. Frank Costello was handling the day-to-day as acting boss, while Vito Genovese pulled strings from across the Atlantic. With Albert Anastasia locking down the waterfronts, the board was almost set. The only piece missing? Harlem. That illegal lottery was a gold mine, pumping out millions every single week. The outfit was desperate for a slice of that pie. Dutch Schultz had tried to brute force his way in back in 1935, but he made a catastrophic error in judgment. He slept on a soft-spoken, well-dressed enforcer named Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson. That mistake cost Schultz his life, leaving him riddled with bullets on a dirty tavern floor in Jersey. 11 years down the road, Luciano was eyeing the same prize. But unlike the Dutchman, Lucky had brains. He knew storming Harlem like a cowboy was a suicide mission. This required finesse, respect, and a legitimate proposal, so he reached out to Bumpy with a simple message: "Let's sit down." Bumpy ghosted him for a solid week. That silence spoke volumes. Lucky was in for a rough ride. When the meeting finally happened, it was at the Stork Club on East 53rd, the hottest ticket in town. It was the kind of joint where Sinatra sang and J. Edgar Hoover nursed cocktails. On February 18, 1946, Lucky bought out the whole VIP section just to make a point. He rolled deep with a 6-man crew, including the heavy hitters: Frank Costello, the brains; Meyer Lansky, the money man; and Albert Anastasia, the grim reaper of the mob. Flanked by 3 stone-cold killers, the Italians waited. Then walked in Bumpy Johnson, solo. 40 years old and looking like $1 million in a bespoke Navy 3-piece and a starched white shirt. He skipped the tie. He always did, but sported a gold chain across his vest. His fade was fresh, and you could practically see your reflection in his shoes. He was gripping a leather briefcase, which made the bodyguards twitch. They went for their heat, but Lucky froze them with a single lifted finger. "Stand down." Bumpy didn't even acknowledge the hired guns as he strode past, his heels clicking rhythmically against the marble. He boldly took the chair at the head of the table, the boss's spot. After setting his case down, he casually produced a cigar while the room held its breath. Costello clenched his teeth, and Anastasia was itching to draw his piece. Lucky, however, just smirked. He knew exactly what game Bumpy was playing. It wasn't an insult, it was a calibration. Bumpy was setting the ground rules without uttering a syllable. Lucky calmly sat down right across from him. "Mr. Johnson, appreciate you showing up." Bumpy fired up his cigar, inhaled deeply, and exhaled a cloud of smoke upwards. "Mr. Luciano, you called the meeting. Speak." Lucky clasped his hands, radiating the composure of a guy who dealt with politicians and hitmen alike, and knew exactly how to handle both. "I'm out of here in 3 weeks. Uncle Sam is deporting me, but I'm not leaving until I know this city runs like a clock. I want peace and profit, not blood in the streets. Bumpy gave a slight nod but kept his mouth shut. Lucky pressed on. Harlem is the only loose end. The numbers game is a gold mine. My guys are hungry for a cut, but I know you've held the reins since the Dutchman went under. You own the streets. You built the system. You bought the cops. He paused, locking eyes with the Harlem boss. I'm not trying to rob you, Bumpy. I'm talking partnership. You stay the boss of Harlem, we bring the bankroll and the muscle. All we ask is 40% of the take. You keep your independence, but you gain the full weight of the commission behind you. The air in the room went still. Costello leaned in, studying Bumpy's face. Lansky tapped a rhythm on the tabletop while Anastasia cracked his knuckles. Bumpy just took another slow pull from his cigar. And if I decline? Lucky's smile stayed fixed, but his eyes turned to ice. Then we've got an issue. You're either on the team or you're the enemy. And enemies don't last long around here. He didn't shout, he didn't threaten, he just stated it like a law of physics, the cold, hard truth that built the Mafia. Bumpy rested his cigar in the crystal tray, clicked open his briefcase, and slid a solitary photo onto the table. Lucky picked it up. His expression remained a mask, but his grip tightened. It was a shot of a warehouse in Red Hook, one of Anastasia's gambling dens, and right there in black and white, shaking hands with a high-ranking police captain, was none other than Albert Anastasia. Snapped that 3 days ago, Bumpy murmured. I've got a dozen more. Different spots, different cops, same story for your whole crew. You could hear a pin drop. Costello reached for his jacket and Anastasia started to rise, but Lucky just shifted his gaze from the picture to the man who brought it. Is this a threat? No, Bumpy replied calmly. It's a courtesy. I could have mailed these to the DA. I could have splashed them across every front page in the city. I could have torched your entire empire before you knew what hit you. But I held back. He leaned in closer. You came here talking partnership, but partners are equals. That 40% deal, that wasn't a partnership. That was a hostile takeover wrapped in a smile. Lucky put the photo down, looking at Bumpy with newfound admiration. All right then. What's your price? Bumpy retrieved his cigar, took a slow, deliberate puff, and let the smoke settle before answering. You're chasing the same ghost Schultz was. The same dream every Italian crew has ever had about Harlem. It's all about control. You crave it, but you can't touch it. And it's not a lack of intelligence holding you back. It certainly isn't a lack of muscle. It's because Harlem doesn't dance to your tune. He gestured toward the window, embracing the city lights. You want to know why Dutch Schultz crashed and burned? He looked at black folks and saw pawns. He figured we'd just empty our pockets and bow our heads. He thought brute force was the only language. But Uptown runs on a different engine. You need loyalty. You need deep-rooted respect. You have to bleed the same blood, and you will never be one of us. Costello opened his mouth to argue, but Luciano shut him down with a single, icy stare. Bumpy pressed his advantage. But here is the counteroffer. Forget the 40% you demanded. You get 10. 10% of the take, not for protection, but as a consulting fee. You handle the financial laundering. We need clean cash ready for the payouts when the lottery hits big. You provide the lawyers when my runners get heat. You do the work, you get a dime on every net dollar. He reclined, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. And there is one non-negotiable condition. You never, and I mean never, send your soldiers north of 110th Street. If you want your cut, I send a runner to your headquarters. I will have it stacked, banded, and ready for pickup. But your fedoras don't walk my blocks. Your Tommy guns stay out of my backyard. Harlem stays black. Harlem remains my kingdom. Take it or leave it. The room went dead silent, the air thick enough to choke on. Meyer Lansky was the first to speak, turning to the boss. Charlie, looking at the numbers, it is a brilliant move. 10 points for zero dirty work, no overhead costs, and zero legal exposure. It is pure, clean profit. Anastasia looked skeptical. And once we set up the wash, what keeps him honest? Bumpy cut in before Luciano could breathe. The same logic that keeps you from invading my turf. Mutually assured destruction. You try to stiff me, those photos hit the front page and your police payroll vanishes overnight. I try to stiff you, you wage war. We throw everything we have at each other and we both bleed out or we both get rich. Make your call. Lucky Luciano studied Bumpy Johnson for a long, heavy minute. Then a low chuckle broke the tension. It wasn't mocking, it was real respect. You know what, Bumpy? Schultz was a moron. He underestimated the wrong man. He stood up and offered his hand. 10% for banking and legal, no Italian boots on the ground, and you handle the drop monthly. Bumpy rose and locked eyes, gripping the hand firmly. We have a deal. Frank Costello let out a long breath. Meyer Lansky grinned. Even Anastasia relaxed into his chair as the adrenaline left the room. Luciano held the handshake for a beat longer than necessary. Listen to me, Bumpy. I have sat across from presidents, police chiefs, union leaders, and hitmen. But you are the first man to walk into my office, look me in the eye, and say no without holding a weapon. That is either balls of steel or a death wish. I haven't figured it out yet. Bumpy cracked a rare, genuine smile. When you decide, let me know. 3 weeks later, Lucky Luciano sailed for Italy. He never stepped foot in America again, but that handshake with Bumpy Johnson held firm for 22 years. The numbers game exploded. Bumpy delivered the 10% with military precision. The 5 families washed the money through legitimate businesses. Even when Bumpy was locked up in 1951 and shipped to Alcatraz, Frank Costello personally ensured the Johnson family never missed a meal or a bill. And when Bumpy walked out of those prison gates in 1963, the arrangement hadn't aged a day. That meeting at the Stork Club became underworld mythology. Not because of the bloodshed, but because 2 kings from opposite worlds sat down and found a path to profit without tearing each other apart. Luciano would later tell his crew in Naples, Bumpy Johnson was the sharpest operator I ever met and the most dangerous because he didn't beg for my respect. He took it. Bumpy never bragged about that night. But insiders say he kept that blackmail photo of Anastasia framed in his office until his dying day. Not as a threat, but as a lesson. True power isn't about being the first to pull the trigger. It is about being smart enough to keep the gun holstered. If this tale of strategy, respect, and the alliance that reshaped the mob fired you up, smash that subscribe button and leave a like. Send this to someone who needs to know how the Godfather of Harlem made the Mafia bend the knee. And tell me below, would you have walked into that room unarmed? Keep building your empire, and I'll see you in the next one.